Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, author Allison Martine Hubbard, author of works of contemporary fantasy, fiction, speculative fiction, and I think basically everything I just listed. That's why I cover those things. I'm so excited to be joined today by author Nick Binge. Nick, do you go by Nick or Nicholas? Because everything says Nicholas in big print, like it's very official, but should I call you Nick?
Yeah, call me Nick. Call me Nick.
Okay.
For some reason, I decided to make the decision when I first started publishing, when they were like, what name do you want to use? I was like, oh, let's go with a full name. That sounds official and fancy and important, you know? And then very quickly realized that was a terrible idea because nobody calls me that in real life.
Yeah, and then you're going, wait, Nicholas, that's on my birth certificate. Was I supposed to
exactly. Yeah.
It's on your birth certificate and your books. And we're talking about your book today, Ascension, which I read. I will admit, there is a science fiction, I think it was like a TV movie or a limited series on a couple years ago called Ascension. So I added your book to my TBR a couple years ago, like before it even came out, thinking, ooh, maybe it's about, no, it's nothing about that. So if you saw that one on the Sci-Fi Channel, that was one thing. This is something completely different. And it's more about talking about actually ascending a mountain. And I'm going to ask your forgiveness in advance, Nick, because I'm going to make a lot of stupid mountain jokes and they will peak. Right now, I'll stop. Okay. So, Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the book, The Ascension, or just Ascension? There's no that.
Yes, sure. So a little bit more about myself. I'm a writer of speculative fiction and the kind of in the broad remit that has. Mainly because most of the books that I write, including Ascension, have elements, sure, of science fiction, but elements of horror, elements of kind of thriller, elements of even kind of fantastical stuff, and kind of all bundled together in a big genre blendy mix way that I really love. It's the kind of stuff I love to read, so it's the kind of stuff that I love to write. So I call it speculative or speculative thrillers, I think is the kind of the label that people put in it.
Well, and I think you also had the literary science fiction term applied to you, which I thought a past publisher was making up when they stuck it on me. And I'm going, sure, if that's what you want to call it, give me a book deal. They didn't. Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, I didn't think that was even a thing, but it is because it's on your stuff too. And I think it fits because it kind of goes into those ways. It feels more science fiction than fantasy, but I love that you're just like speculative blend. And I like
and I'm always kind of skeptical about that. I mean, marketing people will do what marketing people do to make books sell, which is great. That's their job. But I'm always kind of skeptical about that literary science fiction label because it, by definition, suggests that other science fiction is not literary, which is nonsense, right? So yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that. But at the same time, if people want to call it that, sure, whatever.
Well, and I've seen those whole Venn diagrams about what's the difference between commercial and upmarket and book club, and those two things go together, and then literary, and the old joke is literary doesn't sell as well. Yeah. So it's like, well, yours is selling just fine, so let's just call it highbrow. No, that sounds probably worse. You're good.
Yeah.
And Nick, I'm detecting an accent from somewhere north. Can you tell us where you're from?
So I'm where I'm from and where I live are two very different questions. I live in Edinburgh, so I'm in Scotland, and I've lived in Edinburgh for about 4 years now. And my accent is one of those weird nebulous things because I grew up moving around the world. So I was born in Singapore. I've lived in Switzerland. I've lived in Hong Kong. I've lived like in various different countries at different times. I didn't actually live in the UK until I was an adult. So my accent is that kind of like weird expat international school kind of blend of things.
I love it.
So it always makes where are you from a slightly weird question.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I knew you were up there because I knew the Edinburgh part, but I was going to say, you don't sound straight up Scottish. So there's some other travel that happened before you got there, but that explains it. And were most of those places, were you speaking English, or did you have to learn multiple languages? And did that inform the kind of stuff you're saying now?
Some of those places. So I spent a long time growing up in Switzerland, in the French part of Switzerland. So I speak French as well because I grew up speaking it. But that's about it. I mean, I lived in Singapore for a while, in Hong Kong, but those countries, most of the time you can kind of get away with speaking English. And even though I did try for quite some time to learn Cantonese, God, it is a difficult language. Yeah. And it's too easy to give up because everyone speaks English everywhere.
That's
Anyway,
true.
like,
That's true.
if you had to learn it, I probably would have done. But because it was so easy to just be like, this is difficult, then
They see the pale skin and the light eyes, and they're like, "We're going to try English on this one," and there you go. And that is
Yeah,
absolutely
exactly.
true, because I know people who've gone to other places and they're like, "I want to practice mine." They're like, "But I want to practice my English," and we're like, "Okay, well, somebody's going to do their second language here, or we're never going to have a conversation." And I know I was in Brazil speaking Spanish to people who also spoke Spanish, both of us using our second languages. It was not easy. So it's one of those. It's one of those things where I'm like, I don't speak Portuguese and you don't speak English, but we can all do second grade level Spanish. Okay,
Yeah.
here we go. So, but now you're up in Edinburgh, and this is your second book, which is not, it's not set in Edinburgh, and even saying where it's set, like trying to describe Ascension to someone who hasn't read it. First off, like I said, it's not the Sci-Fi Channel one, which was about a spaceship. This is not a spaceship. This is a mountain.
No spaceships in this one.
And it just shows up. There's just a mountain, like,
it just shows up. It shows up in the middle of the ocean, and it's not there one day. The next day it is. And that's the premise, really. They got satellite imagery or what have you, and one day they look and there wasn't a mountain there, and suddenly there is. And it's not just any mountain, right? It's huge. It's
huge.
Unnecessarily. It's taller than Everest, and obviously everybody freaks out because they're like, where did this thing come from? What is it? What do we do with it?
Or as humans go, we should climb that, because it wasn't there before,
right.
so we should climb that, and not stopping necessarily to think, should we be climbing this? And the answer is always, probably no. Strange mountain shows up in the middle of the ocean. I'm not the first person volunteering. At least, I mean, then again, I also don't climb mountains, so I wouldn't ever be picked. But you have this group of people who are picked, and who is even, I can't even say certain things. I'm like, I don't want to spoil who is there on the expedition, but they're looking for like what is going on with this mountain, because it's not just, well, there's a mountain and we're going to explore it, but there's weird phenomena happening. And our main character, who we follow, he is brought in not after the first discovery, but more than one trip has already gone and has gone badly. So he's kind of brought up to be like, well, let's figure things out and also find out what happened to people before you, where it did not end so well for them. And that all kind of comes out near the beginning, so I don't feel like that's too much of a spoiler. But one of the techniques you use in this book, which I absolutely love, is it's a found fiction book. And so this is all told through letters that are written by the main character to his niece that were not received until other points in time. So these were not arriving to the niece as this happens. And there's so much interesting stuff done about, like, this one was received, this one wasn't, this one appears to be out of order. What gave you the idea to tell this particular story with that technique?
I think when I first started writing this story, or when I first kind of came up with the idea of it, the intention, and it morphed and changed over time, but the intention was always to write a bit of a kind of homage to classic Gothic horror in many ways. So the fact that it opens with this framing device, in the future, and then you've got the letters, the kind of epistolary narrative. It's very Frankenstein, it's very Dracula, it's very those kinds of things, right? And even though it's about very different things, it was a very deliberate choice to kind of frame it in that style, because I love it. There's something so magical about found fiction, whether it's a collection of books or whether it's kind of a Blair Witch Project kind of like cinematic version.
Yes.
And I really love the sense of verisimilitude and feeling that you're potentially reading something that it's not true, it's fictional, right. But at the same time it eases that suspension of disbelief to some degree, and it allows you to take that step into the fictional world a little bit further. And I love playing with those ideas, and all the kind of footnoting and stuff like that just adds to that, and it's just really fun as a writer to play around with that as well.
And I love those footnotes where there'd be like, this one seems like it was out of order and the paper doesn't seem like the rest. And yet this is where it's dated. So you had so many things like that I just loved, that sometimes I would stop because I was listening to this. So I would stop and listen to the beginning part again to just properly frame where it was coming. And I was going to say the other book that I'd read fairly recently in terms of having that epistolary, I can't ever say that word, even though it's the epistles, but not the Bible. Yeah. But by way of letter, that's all it means, is Devolution by Max Brooks, where we have something happened and we don't know what, and we're having bits given to us bit by bit to tell the tale. And it has this really wonderful way of juxtaposing a past tense thing because you know it's past tense, but it's written in the moment. And sometimes doing past tense loses that immediacy. And a lot of readers hate present tense for some reason. I write in it sometimes, and some people are like, "Oh, you do." I just go like this when you write present tense, and I personally think it's fun. But you kind of thread that needle by doing both at the same time, because you as the reader know, okay, this was written a while ago, but for the person who's experiencing it, the thing is right outside the tent. The thing is happening right now. This just occurred. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if I'll survive reading this letter. So it has that immediacy that you sometimes lose with past tense. So I love that you did that, and that the way that you were able to deliver all this stuff. Then we get into the fact that this, like you said, it blends all these speculative stuff. So you're like leaning into the horror stuff. I was asking you beforehand, like, is this a book about metaphysics? Is it a book about psychology? And the answer is it's all of those things. And how much did you have to do a lot of research to get some of these concepts, or was that just all the way up here, like in all your travels and education, that you're like, I just know all this stuff?
Yeah, I think it wasn't that I specifically researched it for this book, but it was kind of just over. I love reading, obviously, but like as well as reading a wide range of fiction, I really like reading nonfiction, and I love reading kind of about anything and everything, anything that's interesting, right? And just kind of learning a little bit more about the world and people and weird stuff. And so as I do, kind of I'll kind of note things away, or I'll be like, that's weird and that's interesting. I'm going to think about that a little bit more.
In book.
Use in book at some point. And I've got a file of tons of stuff that I probably will use in later books. And some of it just kind of fit in organically with the themes that I was playing with and exploring. And some of it, and some of it, like I played with some stuff in there and then later took it out because I was like, well, that doesn't actually fit at all. That doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's just kind of it. I think my process is always very much one of discovery when I'm writing, increasingly so actually the more that I write. So I'm not the kind of person that will sit down and plan exactly what happens in the book from beginning to end, and outline everything. I'll kind of sit down with a premise and go, let's see what happens, let's throw some people in a crazy situation and see what takes place. And so there was a lot of that going on.
Well, and I love that because I feel like there's this misconception that the plotters are the real writers because, they've got all this figured out and they have everything strategically outlined. And for me, I'm the same way you are, where I start with a concept and then where does it go? And when I have had the book deal gun to your head to say, you have to tell us everything that's going to happen. When I haven't written it yet, I'm like, I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. I can tell you what could happen, but it probably won't be what does happen, because until I'm actually in the scenes and seeing what's developed over time, I don't know how those things go. And sometimes I can see a little bit ahead, but not usually too far. So I'm kind of like that person ascending the mountain, and I don't know how I'm getting to the top, and I might not even know what's up there. So I love that you were able to pull a book like this out, and you're like, I did it by discovery, and this just shows the beauty of that. So for anybody going, well, real writers need to do this, there's a cat at my feet, don't mind him. That I just love that you had this, and that you worked in so many different themes and types of things to explore. Like I said, metaphysics. There's a lot of faith discussion in this about what happens and what our souls are and things like that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a speculative novel. I have to pick up Boba because he's making a lot of noise. Boba,
that's fine. I'm always here for a little cat edition.
Okay, this is Boba. He and his two brothers arrived yesterday. And he's loud, so I'm going to put him over. Okay. So I love that you did all that, and you did that without having to be like, okay, I'm going to put in right here. This is where I'm going to take a metaphysical term, and here's where I'm going to explore psychology, and here's where I'm going to explore loss. And you do all these things beautifully, but I like that it happened organically versus I had to sit down and put it on my.
I see it very much like I don't know, building a house. Not that I've ever built a house, but in the kind of imaginary world where I might have built a house, that like. From the beginning, the first few chapters as you write them, right, you're very much laying the foundations and the initial brickwork of kind of the bottom of the house. And if I don't have that, how am I going to have any idea what the final house is going to look like?
Yeah.
Like to me, to try and attempt to guess the ending of a novel where I haven't done that work and I haven't laid those foundations of the first few chapters, the first half of the novel and things like that, to me that seems ludicrous. But maybe that's just the way my brain works. But like I just can't. I can't imagine how I would conceptualize an ending or even a kind of a last third that would make any sense.
Yeah, I agree. But I know everybody's brains work differently. And I think that's one of the
Yeah.
things that I love. And like I said, I want to cheer the people on who are doing things differently than I am, but also champion people who are saying, yes, the way you're doing it is valid, because sometimes in the industry, they're like, you can only do it this way because we expect you to be able to produce this way, or with deadlines, etc. Like, well, we won't buy the book unless we can see how it's going to go, but we're not going to give you the time to actually write the book either. So it gets a little strange. But for this one, about how long did it take you to write this? Because this is not your first book. Your first book is that
No,
Professor
I mean,
Everywhere. Is that the
yeah, my first published book was Professor Everywhere. I mean, if you go back a little bit, I wrote a couple before that. So I probably started writing. I probably about 5 years before I wrote Ascension. I started being like, oh, I'm gonna like I'd written all my life, short stories and things like that. But that was the time where I was like, I'm gonna write a novel because I think I should try and at least attempt it at some point in my life, and I did, and I wrote this um, horrifically derivative second world fantasy novel, and I am glad that nobody in the world has any opportunity to read it.
Oh,
Which
come
is
on!
great.
You can
But
sell it at a charity auction later for save
yeah,
the tax or
I do.
something.
I
Both
wouldn't want that to happen. I don't think. But you kind of need to get that out of your system, if only to just kind of teach yourself that, like, I can complete a novel. This is how it
Yes,
works. You can get to the end and you can put the end on it and move on.
and then put it in a drawer.
Yeah, put it in a drawer and never look at it again. And so, I did that, and I wrote another one, and it kind of, I was working my way. I found that I was working my way away from writing straight kind of genre fantasy, which is where I started from, because I was trying to think about. It was a moment of realization where I was like, why am I actually writing in this space? And I think it was because, yeah,
Why am
I
I
think
over here?
I think it was because I was like, I'm going to write a book. And I was thinking about books that I loved. And my mind went back to the experience of, being a teenager, or like 13, 14 years old, and just devouring those, like, 10 book epic fantasy series, and
I
just
will
like
be
living in
one.
those worlds. I was like, I'm going to do that. And after writing one, and attempting another one, I was like, but I don't really read that anymore. Like right now, I don't
Like
like,
a 13-year-old Nick was all about that, but grown
yeah,
up Nick
exactly.
maybe a little less.
And so it just, yeah, it ended up feeling really inauthentic. And I was like, well, what
Mhm.
do I read now? And I was like, I read a load of weird shit. Like, I read stuff that pushes boundaries. I read stuff that blends genres. I read stuff that kind of, anything where I go like, I have no idea where this author is taking me right now. That's the kind of stuff that I love. So I was like, I want to write something a little bit more like that, and something that plays with my favorite stuff, as it is in Ascension,
Mhm.
as it is in Professor Everywhere, which I can talk a little bit more about, and as it is in any future works that you see from me. I love books that play with form to some degree. So in Ascension, the fan fiction and the frame narrative and all that kind of stuff, Professor Everywhere is this. It's written. It's written as a memoir
Okay.
from the protagonist 10 years after an event, but it's also filled with kind of footnotes and stuff like that that make it feel like very real. And it's all about this event that happens at the end of the book, but it's because it's written in a kind of imagine that it's a real document, and this event was like huge and world changing.
Right.
It kind of
Then you
talks
assume
about
that,
it
like,
as if it
the reader
is,
knows.
yeah, assumes
Right.
everybody knows what it is,
Yeah.
in the same way that you wouldn't feel the need to stop and explain what, I don't know,
The
the,
pandemic.
the pandemic was, or like
Yeah.
the bombing of Hiroshima was, or something like that. Like you wouldn't need to, you just kind of get on with it and reference it. And so there's slow building up references where the reader's like, what is this
What
thing that happened?
what
How did
happened?
we get there? Like, so yeah, any type of playing with form is stuff that I really enjoyed to read. So I knew that I wanted to do a little bit more of that in my own work, and just kind of, yeah, fuck about with narrative a little bit and see what happens,
And not a 10 installment epic fantasy with
Not a 10
sexual
installment
element.
epic fantasy. No.
And there are people who love that, and I
And
have huge
I'm here
respect
for
for
it,
people
but
who write that.
it's not me.
And
Yeah.
it's not really what I read either. And I think, like you, I have that same issue with going, where do I fall? Because I mean, when I was originally asked by a producer for a network that the show's no longer on, to do, like, oh, you do the kind of stuff you like. And I go, I don't know what that is, because when I say I think speculative is more of where my space is, and not just because when you talk about science fiction, a lot of the most well-known science fiction books or most popular, I'm like, and that's not really my cup of tea. It's some of these more obscure ones or ones that don't quite fit in the box, but then really well done, true sci-fi, like the Expanse series. I love that, but that's not how I write, not even close. And also the fact, like you said earlier, your stuff veers towards horror, that I have been over the past couple years, and I blame one of my writing besties who is a horror writer, that she's dragged me slowly but surely that direction, not just through her own work, but because she keeps introducing me to new writers. And then when I go, oh, what writers am I most respecting, what work they're doing, it's mostly horror writers. And I'm going, I don't write horror. I'm like, but do I? I'm like, no, don't. I keep tipping, but I'm trying to stay more speculative in the sci-fi fantasy realm where science fantasy kind of plays. But I feel like those Venn diagrams can kind of reposition.
I think it's also because horror is the most nebulous of the genres. So, you know, when you think about science fiction or you think about fantasy, we've got these really, really clear tropes in our heads that not all books adhere to, but like, you know, spaceships and robots and that kind of thing, or you know,
over here, spaceships over there. When you put them together, you get Star Wars, and there you go. But again, we can have people argue about where those are, and I find that speculative realm where the books don't quite fit in anything specific, but you're like, okay, well, some of this stuff definitely couldn't have happened, at least as far as we understand the rules of reality. So it's got to be speculative. But like your book, it's the kind of book, and these were the kind of books I was binging when I was in like early 20s, late middle school, or not middle school, late high school, early 20s, where I was reading the books that they felt like action thrillers, but something was happening. Often it did involve Bigfoot. I do admit a lot of them involved too many Yeti, but things where it's like mostly, oh, it's scientists and doing this and it's contemporaneously set, but then things are happening that couldn't happen. And I've been told, oh, that's action adventure. But for me, action adventure shouldn't include real Bigfoot. So I don't really know. Like I would say that's speculative, but I don't really know.
Yeah, I think it didn't have a label back in the day in the same kind of way. I mean, everything that, or not everything, but a large proportion of what, for example, Michael Crichton wrote was speculative fiction, right? Speculative thrillers, which was essentially it's that same genre. It's scientists stumbling upon some weird shit and finding out what's happening.
Doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Doing things they shouldn't be doing. Exactly. And so I think to some degree, it's an obsession with marketing and labeling that has forced us to kind of put things in these boxes that they don't necessarily fit into. But one thing I like about horror is that because the genre is based not so much on the kind of tropes and things like that, it's based on an emotional feeling, right? And as such, I find that the most interesting, the most forward-thinking books in the genre space in terms of form, in terms of narrative and things like that tend to be the horror books, right?
I agree.
When I read horror, it's less that I'm reading it to be scared, and it's more that I'm reading it because actually it's just really interesting.
It's really interesting, and I think you're right. And some of it, I also wonder if some of that happens to come with how the industry has addressed it. And some of this is stuff that I wasn't aware of, but I would say in the horror realm, there is kind of a range of accepted forms of publication that indie horror is not lesser than. It's just a different form. And so many of the big names now started out, they were at a small indie publisher. They ended up having like 3 runs of a book, and then a bigger publisher picked up later stuff and brought their backlist out. But those earlier works are no less acceptable than the later works, just because they originally didn't come out with one of the big 5 or one of the bigger name mid-sized publishers. And I feel like that divide is much bigger, like the chasm's bigger in fantasy and science fiction, where if you didn't get a deal from one of the bigger names, you did a small public, you're not accepted, we aren't going to consider you as part of the team, and that it's more cliquish in that way. And I think because of that, horror is like, we'll let you play with whatever, and we will let the cream rise to the top. And so they're willing to take those risks. They're willing to say, I want to see what this is going to look like. This is very strange. And some of the best stuff coming out right now is coming out from authors who are being allowed to play with that form and aren't being constrained by, the marketing team says it has to fit over here on this shelf here. And I think that's the benefit of the reader.
Definitely. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So Professor Everywhere played with an idea of a memoir and an event. And then Ascension has these letters in a briefcase, for lack of a better word. And also this feeling of playing with time. And for me, like time and I don't want to say time travel, but playing with time is one of my favorite things because I both love reading about it and also fully believe you can't do it. So it's one of those things where I'm like, how are you going to break my brain? That couldn't happen. Ooh, what happened? And I loved how you did this because it was subtle when it started coming in, but you weave it in through everything from lost time from characters, papers being out of order, and then even addressing like, well, where is this mountain coming from in terms of it just shows up one day. And we also know that talking about like how geological events work, a mountain just can't show up. So all of those things play with the matter of time. Was this one, did you sit down and go, I want to screw around with time a bit? Was that where that started, or did it just kind of organically show up as you're like, how did this mountain get here? And go, I don't know.
I think everything that I've written and continue to write kind of muck about with time to some degree, because I find it so fascinating. And I find it's just such an interesting way of exploring character internality and different character moments and things like that by just, whether you do the straight time travel or whether you just kind of extend things and move things and change things. And part of that for Ascension was the kind of horror aspect of it. For me, the scary stuff is often when we take things that we fundamentally rely on and assume to be always constant and true, and you pull that out from underneath characters. And one of those is the passing of time, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're up on this mountain and things are getting weird, when you start to lose trust in whether time is passing in the way that you believe it does, right? That's a terrifying thing because you've lost control over basically everything at that point, right? And it allowed me to have a lot of fun with the letter. Like you say, there's a point in the letters, and you might not notice this the first time round, but it was quite deliberate that the dating on the letters falls out of sync with the number of days passing in the narrative before Harold notices that it does. Like a few letters before he notices, hopefully the reader might start to notice, like, hold on, this is 2 days later, but he said that it's the next morning. You know what I mean? And there's a slight falling out of sync before he even notices that it's falling out of sync, which was very
well. And I'm not great with math, and like I said, I listened to it, so it was one of those things where I didn't notice it right away. But I'm like, wait, didn't you? It would be easier in a physical book to be like, put your hand one page, turn back, going,
yeah,
hold on. And that's the kind of thing also that you go, is the author not counting right? Because if I was the one writing it, I just wouldn't count right because I'm very bad at math. So there have been times where I've sent books to beta readers and like, you do realize you skipped chapter 13. I'm like, did I need that one? And I'm just like, I just can't count. Fix it now. That's something I check on. But that's
I did have a bit of a back and forth with the copy editor where she was like, is this intentional or is this unintentional? Like, have you just made a mistake? And sometimes I had just made a mistake, but sometimes it was intentional.
You're like, that's where you need the second thing. Okay, day one for us, we're going to label it this. Day two, we're going to label it that. But for him, he's going to think it's this day because he doesn't know. And it's also, like you mentioned, so the main character is this man brought into it late, but there are people who've already been there. There are people who come up at the same time he does. There are people from different organizations. And one of the things you play fast and loose with is where these people are from and who's organizing all this, because it wasn't like he was, well, I'm a scientist doing these things and then I get a call and then I come in. It was more of like, we're bringing you in for this and now we're bringing you over here. And you didn't really get a chance to stop and think about what was happening. You're just in it. And was that something that you decided to do on purpose to leave the reader going, I don't know what's happening here, or even who's in charge? Like you're feeling like that through a lot of the book, going, who's in charge of this? And Nick's like, it was me.
Yeah, and I think that's something that first person allows you to do, particularly the kind of really close letter form first person in a way that you experience that same disorientation that the narrator's feeling, right? He doesn't know what's going on, so you don't know what's going on, and you can maybe kind of start to pick at some things at the margins, but part of that is the writing as well. Like, I halfway through the book, if you would, like, while I was writing it, if you said to me, so who is actually in charge of this? I'd be like, I don't know yet. I'll find out when I get there. But
it was him the whole time. No, it was not him the whole time. Spoiler alert, it wasn't him the whole time. But the idea that because these people, like, no one's sure who's in charge and it's unclear how long each group has gotten there, that they're also, like, the whole issue of time they're not all experiencing it even together. So it's not even like the idea of like you're in a dark room and it's all dark for each of you. No, you're in different dark rooms where you don't know what's happening. And some people are like, yeah, I'm having this and I've been here and there's marks on the wall and you're going, we've been here for like a day and a half. Why do you have like 2 weeks up there? This doesn't make sense. And that to me is absolutely terrifying, especially because like we know that time is this construct, it's this thing we made up. But if we can't all agree on it, then it's completely worthless. So it's like, all right, where are we and how long have we been up here and what's going to happen next? And the answer is nobody knows. But you do know what you're working on next, don't you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite prolific, so I'm a little bit ahead of myself to some degree.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah,
Except
it
for
is.
when we're like, I don't remember what I
nice.
wrote, and someone's asking me about it, and I don't remember any of the characters in the story. That's all right. That's all right. What are you working on now, Nick?
So, well, what I'm working on now is separate to what my next book is, I suppose. Because the next book is already in copy edits. So that's
Very
coming
nice.
out. Yeah, which is great. So that's going to be coming out early next year, basically early 2020.
Can you tell us about that, and then tell us about what you're working on right now?
Yeah, sure. So that's
literally.
That is another speculative thriller that mucks about with form and things like that. It's probably the most complicated thing I've written thus far. There's about 3 different timelines all kind of happening simultaneously that kind of.
So what I'm hearing is, if I listen to it, I also need to be taking notes because otherwise I'll probably get confused.
Yeah, maybe. But I had a lot of fun with it. It's again, it's got some horror elements, but it was very much thematically it's playing with, or it's exploring ideas of Alzheimer's and dementia, because I find that concept terrifying, not just as an individual in that sense of losing who you are, but also in someone that you love and seeing them lose who they are and the way it changes your relationship with them and all of these sorts of things. So the protagonist is actually an 83-year-old woman who's caring for her dementia-ridden husband, and basically, long story short, it's a very quick premise. She's there. She's kind of at the sunset of her life. You know, she's the loneliest she's ever been because her husband basically doesn't remember her and all of these moments that are important to them. She's the sole custodian of them still, and she's really caring out of a sense of duty, but she doesn't really have much else left. This guy shows up at her door, who seems very suspicious and a little bit predatory, and you're like, what's going on? In that kind of like, you know, when people show up at old ladies' doors, you think they're trying to swindle them, or, you know,
they generally are.
They generally are.
Yeah.
And he presents her with what at the same time seems like the most absurd conspiracy that she's ever heard, but also the thing that she's most wanted to hear in her entire life, which is, what if her husband doesn't actually have Alzheimer's? What if it's being done to him to hide some secret in his past that people don't want to come out? And that then propels them on an adventure that involves her diving into his mind in a kind of Inception-esque way. There's all sorts of kind of jumping around in kind of going back to his youth and time and all of these kinds of things. I described it as it's the time traveler's wife meets Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with some Inception vibes going on at the same time. Like, I love that. All of those things together.
It's all of those. And when you said multiple timelines, then you need all those things to make sense of all of that. And just to think, though, that something like that's been done to somebody, that absolutely is terrifying. And it's interesting because there are those people who are like the memory keepers of a family. And for mine, it was my mother, and she passed away. And we say, not even as a joke, that a lot of even my father's memory went with her because he was the one, he didn't remember. He would just look at her and be like, you know when that was. And she's not here now. So it's like, we look at him and he's like, I don't know. It's like, you don't know your second grade teacher, but his wife would have, you know? And it's like, he has remarried, but she doesn't have that history. So that whole idea of the joint history and then being able to say, oh, it's done to somebody, shivers. Okay. And that one's with copy edits now. So, okay, copy editor, please don't mess with the timelines. Those are intentional.
Yeah. Or tell me when they're mistakes. You know, I'm not perfect.
Like, I'm not infallible. However, some of this was deliberate.
Yeah, exactly. And we can work them out together.
Yes.
So that's next up in terms of a novel, and that will be coming out with the same publishers that I have in the UK and the US. So it was
Who are you released with in both? Because I don't remember.
Ascension was Harper Voyager in the UK, and it was Riverhead Books in the US.
Okay. Yeah, I'm like, I had the audio and I don't remember what it said, because sometimes it's like something different for the audio too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the audio would have been, if it was US, it'd be like Penguin Audio or whatever, because River had a Penguin imprint. So it's with them as well next year, and then next year as well, you'll probably see a novella from Tor.com out with me as well. And so I'm working on the second novella of a kind of 2-book contract with them at the moment. That's what I'm working on right now. So there's a bunch of different stuff in the next couple of years that will be coming out.
And that's not even what you're working on now, is it? Or is the novella what you're working on now?
I'm working on the second novella in a 2-book deal of that. So the first one, which hopefully will come out at some point next year, that's finished, that's done, and I'm working on the next one now. Yeah.
And then you're also going everywhere and doing everything, because you were just at a couple of events, and you're going at one that I have such FOMO for, because I'm not in the UK and can't get anywhere there. So tell us about, was it Stranger Up North?
It's Strange Up North. Yeah, it came out of it was born out of a little Discord conversation amongst a few writers, actually, where we were just,
as all good things are.
All good things are. And we were complaining about the fact that in the UK, and there's probably similarities in the US, but in the UK, publishing is so London centric.
It's all London. Yeah.
And so whenever like big, cool, like you'll get book launches occasionally happening at different parts of the country if the authors live there, but whenever big, cool events happen, they happen in London.
Which is not close to you guys.
Yeah, if you happen to live up in Scotland, or you live in the north of England or things like that, getting to London and booking accommodation in London and doing all these sorts of things is not necessarily cheap or easy. Yeah. And so a lot of people who don't live in London miss out. We were like, it would be nice if we could do some stuff up north, right? So we were like, well, and the other thing was like, there was some sense of frustration that so much of the event handling goes through publishers who, and you know, as much as they are wonderful people, editors and publicists and things like that are often extremely overworked, have enough on their plates anyway to be going out of their way to organizing kind of new events and things like that. And so we were just like, let's just do it ourselves. Let's just, we know the authors. We've met them.
We're all on this Discord.
Yeah, we've met them at book launches, or we've met them at like book festivals and stuff like that. Like, we're all friends. We all know each other. We all know that people are interested in doing this kind of thing. So let's just do it. So we reached out to a whole bunch of speculative authors of wide variety that we knew lived in the north, and basically went like, do you guys want to do a big event? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So we started planning, and we reached out to a big Waterstones in Leeds that's like this huge 3-floor shop, and we were like, can we just come and take over the shop for an evening and like do an event?
What did they say?
Like, so it's been a bit of planning, but it's this weekend, and I think it's around 200 people was our capacity, because that's how many we could fit in the shop without like health and safety regulations saying that you
can't do this anymore.
We can't do any more. And I'm pretty sure we've sold out. So
that's awesome for a debut event to be like that. But like you said, not only are a lot of the authors like, I can't afford to come down there and do this, especially
exactly. There's lots of people who live in these places that can't afford to go as well. Yeah.
They're missing out on the events. And in the US, we don't have like a central location, but I do feel like there are hot spots for different genres and where you see things happen, and there are big festivals and all that. And if you don't live in that area, then it's like, okay, well, I'd like to go, but how expensive is it for me to go or to go visit these people? And I feel like, so I live in California, which as last I checked, we are bigger than all of the United Kingdom. And as far as I know, there are a few events that take place, like the LA Times Festival of Books that happens in within a driving distance that I wouldn't have to spend the night somewhere. But I feel like I live between two places where things are always happening. They're either in LA or in San Diego, and they just pretend Orange County does not exist. I know we're behind, like they say, the orange curtain, but we've gotten rid of the orange curtain now. We're much more friendly, I promise. And nothing ever happens here. And to the point where I was joking with one of my horror friends, Clay McLeod Chapman. There is a new Barnes and Noble near where he was at some point that had a lovely display of all of his books. And I'm like, if you have pull with Barnes and Noble, can you get them to rebuild the one that semi-burned down near me? Because it's like they aren't even close to me anymore. That we don't have, there are different bookstores around here, but we don't have Waterstones, we don't have Gibsons, we have Barnes and Noble. And if you take away our Barnes and Noble, we are left with these little bitty indies. And I'm a huge supporter of the little itty bitty indies, but they aren't necessarily great for having big book launches because their capacity is 7 people. So it's I was at a reading for a friend of mine, and she had her parents' friends, 3 of us, and we took up the entire space, and we're like, well, guess it's just going to be us here because everybody else had to wait outside, which is great, but it's not, you don't have the same space. So I'm glad you guys took over like a 3-story place and bring all the people from the north.
Well, the other incentive as well for doing it that we were discussing was when you do get book festivals that happen across the UK, and there are some of them, that a lot of these like literary festivals that take place in certain places, end up being extremely snobby about genre fiction, right? Yeah. So they'll pack it with kind of all sorts of literary fiction and stuff like that. But if you like,
but you're literary.
You write science fiction, like no,
but
please.
It's literary science fiction.
Yeah, it's literary science fiction. Look, it says it on the book. Yes. But yeah, no, they're really snobby about genre fiction in a ludicrous way that like we don't need to get into. But part of it was so this weekend as well, we're hosting this event in Leeds, which is a city kind of north of London in the UK, and this same weekend, the reason we picked this weekend is also the Leeds Literary Festival, which is happening the same weekend. So it's a very deliberate fuck you to the Leeds Literary Festival. You know what I mean? We're gonna set up
over there.
It's the scene from. It's the scene from Futurama, right? We're gonna make our own event with blackjack and hookers. Like we're gonna set up our own thing.
Hookers in the book festival. I can't see, like, one of the people I know you're coordinating with is Sun Yedin, and I do not see her going, bring the hookers. I can see her going, like, we're gonna have like a workout area, and she'll like try to pick up all the books.
Jiu-jitsu, yeah.
She will, but I don't think she's blackjack. Maybe hookers, probably not.
Less likely. But yeah, so it's just like, we're going to set up our own event. We don't need a festival to do it. And look, we can sell it out as well. We can make a bigger event than you guys are doing, and we're going to sell it out because actually the readers want it. Yeah. And it's ridiculous that you're being snobby about it.
Yeah. And I don't know anybody who's clamoring to go to a literary festival that excludes the genre fiction, because I feel like that's what most people are actually reading. And that whole idea of the snobbery about it is interesting, because I recently had 2 rejections where I feel like I wanted them to go get in the same room and just between the 2 of them figure out who wanted my book. The answer was neither. But like one of them was like, this is too genre to be like general fiction, and then there was like, this is too general fiction to be genre. And I'm like, could you just talk to each other and just put my book somewhere? Because both of them agreed that the book was good. They just agreed that it wasn't quite enough of anything. And so many readers love that sweet spot, yet the industry is still like, we don't really want to deal with that. And readers are like, guys, just tell us about the book and put a pretty cover on it, and we will find it. And if we like it, it'll sell. Exactly. Rather than, and I think that so much in industry, they bend over backwards trying to tell us what the book is like instead of letting the book speak for itself, because I think readers are too dumb to figure it out on their own. But a pretty cover does help. I mean, that's absolutely true. But I feel like sometimes they're scared of like embracing the speculative, when most readers are fine with it to a certain degree. But yeah, when you cross that line to, yes, it's all aliens and speaking in gleep glorps, and it's like early seasons of Doctor Who where it's duct tape and a toilet plunger, that does turn off some, not most readers, but who embrace that kind of sub genre. But it's not the whole genre, and there are so many readers who are open to that more grounded speculative that it feels like, okay, the literary association is going to say, oh, it's too genre. Like,
yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's ridiculous, and it's not like, and then you have literary fiction authors whom I love, right, play in this genre space. It's no shade on the authors whatsoever. People like Ishiguro, people like Margaret Atwood and stuff like that, right, and they're like praised and lauded for it, and then you're
Exactly.
like, oh, what's going on here? This is
Like
ridiculous.
last I checked, Oryx and Crake was very much so speculative fiction, but they're like, oh no, it's literary. I'm like, yes, because that was the style it was written in, and the whole
Yeah.
idea of literary being a genre. It's like literary isn't a genre; it is a style of storytelling. And again, there are readers who prefer that and readers who don't. Some people are like, give me plain fiction. This became kind of purple lavenderish prose, and they don't want that. And that's, again, readers have a variety of what they want to read. And, you know, there are people who are like, give me all of that. And others who are like, can you just tell me a really straightforward story? And I don't really care about the prose. And when I talk to those people, I'm like, how do you not care about the prose? But
Yeah.
everyone has preferences. And,
Yeah.
you know, it'd be nice if all of them were embraced and selling out events and leads, and that's super awesome. I'm glad you get to go do that. So I will have my FOMO from over here. I still haven't gotten over missing out on like the House of Last Resort event that Christopher Golden did. And again, these are author organized events, and I feel like that's kind of the future where a lot of these things are going, because they have their finger on the pulse of what readers want to come to and what works for the authors in attendance as well. Because when you make things be like, oh, it's going to be this expensive to be part of the convention or part of the event, plus accommodations, plus all this stuff, it just gets kind of crazy. It's like, are you close enough to Leeds? Do you need to stay somewhere to be there, or are you able to just hop a train?
I'm staying at SUNY, so it's fine. Like,
okay, it's staying at SUNY, so it's close enough. Because I was trying two of my best writing friends are both in the UK, and in my head they're next door neighbors, and they're like, Allison, we're like 4 hours apart. And I'm like, no, I can see you on the map. You're really close to each other. But they're like, Suffolk and Nottingham are not close to each other. But that was like, it also took Francis like a year to convince me that Nottingham was not a fictional place, because I'm like, nope, that's where Robin Hood lives. He's not real, Francis. You don't live in a real place. She's like, it isn't real. I'm like, Click me posting something to her for me to, okay, I guess it is.
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess it's real. I'll believe you then. But it's grounded, you know, because Robin Hood feels kind of grounded. But
yeah.
Nick, it's been amazing getting to talk to you. I am so glad I got to stumble upon this, even if I was lured under a science fiction false pretense of it being very similar to the name of a show. The same thing happened when I read a book called Severance.
Books, I'll take it, you know.
It's not the show. Well, it's funny because like people don't realize this, but titles aren't copywritten. So unless it's like a really long thing where you go, you know, you can't have a second one like this. When you get a 1 or 2 word title, odds are there's another book out there with the same name.
There's
or
probably a few, yeah.
Francis's is also like a World War II book. So every so often you see one's like, my father survived this event. I'm like, I don't think he did. That's a magical boat. I don't think he was on that. Sorry, guys. But I loved it. I'm looking forward to your next one. I appreciate you coming and talking with everyone watching right now. Hello, everyone watching live, and everyone who's watching on the replay. If you are on YouTube, please like and subscribe. That way you get all the Vox Vomitus stuff, which includes this show, Vox Vomitus, and Let's Scare Jennifer to Death, that's pure horror and like true crime, and I watch it like this. Nick, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys. I think we have next week, we have Rebecca Rowland with her, like, I think Shirley Jackson nominated collection coming on, White Trash and Recycled Nightmares. So we will see you next time. Thank you, Nick, for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.